Welcome to this audio edition of Beverly Hills Bar Association's 2024 Trends and Transitions for Media and Entertainment Lawyers. This presentation was recorded on August 23, 2024, during the first annual Entertainment Law Summit. In just a moment, you'll hear Ken Ziffren present his annual review and assessment of key developments that are shaping the practice of entertainment law. He will discuss recent changes, emerging trends, and their impact on the rights and responsibilities of various parties within the entertainment industry. You may be eligible for CLE credit in your state. After finishing this episode, visit bhba.org/podcasts for more information and to claim your CLE certificate.
As usual, but in a different order, I'm going to start with Wall Street, then go to collective bargaining, then to theatrical, and then to TV, slant, SBOT, ABOT, and so on. If I start on Wall Street with the current state of play on the Paramount Global situation, I think the only thing I can say that makes any sense is that this is a saga. So I'll move on.
Recording in progress.
Other thing that I want to remind you of is that 3-4 years ago, under the Trump administration, the Paramount consent decree was erased, and in a weird way, a few months ago, one of the companies that might have been affected by that, Sony, purchased or is about to purchase, I don't think it's closed yet, Alamo Drafthouse, which has 35 venues in 25 markets. And we are now therefore looking at one of the, quote, major studios purchasing, forgive me, more than a Oscar event movie theater, which is where a bunch of the others have gone. And what more vertical integration do we get than where we are? So we'll just see how that plays. On the international front, because of some, I'll call it financial, I don't want to say manipulations, but some financial playing, Vivendi is likely to be parting from Canal Plus, one of the major pay services, albeit linear, in France. And who may end up controlling that may also affect what happens in the French, if not Italian, and other community. The other kind of Wall Street type fun issue that's out before us is waiting for the neutral arbitrator in the matter of Disney versus Comcast on the valuation of Hulu to go this way or that way, with the delta, that is Disney at what I'll call 0 and Comcast at way more than 0. The delta there is $5 billion. I don't know whether that matters to either company, but I'm sure they're fighting hard either to get it or to avoid it. And then finally, there is, as usual, a crisscross of interest from all concerned in India, now the most populous country in the world. And at the same time that there's M&A, there's divestiture, there is reorganization, and it's just wonderful and almost impossible to follow, so I'm not going to try. On the front of the agencies in town, Endeavor, after a 3 to 4 year attempt at trying to attract Wall Street interest, their parent company is pulling Endeavor in as a unit, a public unit, so that Endeavor will still be around in spades, WME, but not with a public presence except as a 51% holder of a company called, of course, TKO. For those of you who do boxing, you know what I mean. And that's a $21 billion valuation, and with a more than $7 billion market cap. And so that's what's developed this year as opposed to in the past. In the case of CAA, we have a new majority owner that wasn't around before, and what we're told without knowing one way or the other is that CAA was valued in that transaction where the majority moved from basically a venture capital firm over to a I don't want to call it fragrance firm, but a fashion firm, at least owner of fashion firm, with a valuation of over $7 billion. And UTA, separate and apart from fighting with Michael Kazin, which is a whole different story that I'm not going to get into, is expanding rapidly in the sports area with Rich Paul, and also has a new financial investor, which is more or less the first time, at least to the size of the investment that it's had. Continuing in this vein, sports on Wall Street, you know that the NBA has just, I'll say, technically closed an 11-year deal with 3 different outlets. The 11 years totaling a little more than $76 billion of guarantee. And there's now a lawsuit brought by the 4th entity, a company that you may be familiar with. It's called Warner Brothers Discovery. And they're suing the NBA for matching rights that they believe they have against the Amazon deal. Therefore, not against what I'll call either of the linear deals or either of the hybrid deals that the NBA made with Disney and with now Comcast, but with the so-called pure deal with Amazon, and believing that the language in its former deal with NBA entitles them to match the terms of the deal that the NBA made with Amazon. So that is pending and unclear how long or how short that might last. There's also a pending deal, non-deal, which I can't follow, between the PGA and the LIV, respectively, the golf issues. And that's with the government on the one hand and an unclosed merger deal on the other. Whatever, I just want to bring it to your attention. And finally, on that front, there's a entity called Venue without the second E, VENU, where Fubo, a primarily sports-related outlet, got an injunction last week, preliminary injunction, from the U.S. District Court to prevent the venue from being started. That's either a blow to, or even conceivably a blessing to the three entities who were going to team up. And here's the fun part of this one. The three entities, Disney, Warner, and Fox, yes, there's still a Fox around, formed an entity that was limited to sports, live and related sports activities. And that's what the district court found to be potentially illegal under the antitrust laws. Now, why? Let me take you backwards. Every major entity in our film TV world, formerly a B2B world, wanted to expand. And so as part of their expansion, they go to the outlets, this is B2B time now, and they say, you want our channel, the big one, for example, it used to be ABC, or it may have been ESPN. But if you take ESPN, we also want you to take the following, and then there's this long list of other channels. So individually, Disney on its part, Warner's on its part, and Fox on its part, Fox in the case of Fox News, if you want Fox News, you got to take X, Y, and Z. Individually, that's the way the world worked for the last 20 years. But when the three of them join up and say we're limiting ourselves only to sports programming, the district court found that that could lead to illegal concentration, would affect or raise consumer pricing, and therefore stopped it from happening. That's being appealed. I'm not sure what good the appeal will do, because the whole intent of Venue was to start next week so that they could, in effect, cover what I'll call two of the 4 or 5 legs of the NFL, meaning, I'll give you the days of the week, Sunday, Monday, and used to be Thursday, but not anymore, for Disney and Fox. Warner isn't a NFL signatory, but anyway, it's kind of amusing, at least to me, that what each individual studio was doing on its own regularly with outlets, when 3 of them get together, is no longer legal. So we'll see. On to collective bargaining. A year ago, we're in the middle of 2 strikes. In fact, I looked back at my notes and I saw that this was a year ago yesterday, that the parties, that is in that case, the Writers Guild, had met and got nowhere with the AMPTP. Eventually, of course, thank goodness, that was resolved. WGA and the AMPTP signed, and subsequently SAG signed. So, and originally DGA had signed. So the guilds were all, as of November of last year, all signed up for their collective bargaining, respectively. This year, not the guild, but the unions. So let me just oversimplify matters by saying that last year was white-collar bargaining, and this year was blue-collar bargaining. The IATSE achieved some notable advances, primarily to shoring up their health plan, as well as some life kind of stuff, so that below-the-line workers arguably aren't going to have to work more than 15 hours a day and have breaks that are suitable on the weekends. They achieved that, believe it or not, weeks before the deadline for their contract is up. The basic crafts slant Teamsters came in and were days before the expiration of their contract, July 31st, and they signed. What I'm now going to focus on is what's the kind of global look at what's happened with those 5 guilds and unions having closed their deals. The simple answer is that every union-related entertainment project will cost more than it did. I'm not saying that's bad, because whether it's the writers, actors, directors, or below-the-line personnel, all need and needed a major lift in their minimums and in other areas as well. But I pose to you, and this partially, not completely, explains why we're looking at decreased production post-strikes. Or I could say, looking at decreased production post-guild and union contracts. It's going to cost more. I know there are a dozen or more production companies and studios trying to pencil it out for their shows, whether those are movies, documentaries, scripted shows, the few that are non-union, non-scripted shows, and so on. And it's totally financially reasonable for them, if they've set their budgets for the year, to say, this is going to cost more than it did before. I can't bust my budget, so I'm going to have to decrease the number of shows that I do produce. I'm oversimplifying what was a very complex and hard-fought situation, but I'm also trying to give you a look, and I'll cover that later when I come down, talk about the TV and situation as it now exists. So, moving on to theatrical, start with what I teach at UCLA. I teach a course that's basically theatrical sequential distribution, aka windows. So how are the windows going? The good news for the industry, and I hope for the public, is that none of the major studios and most of the production companies are committed, if they are going to go theatrical, to have theatrical as exclusive with no digital day and date mess. So the issue will then be frontal. Am I better off, a production company distributor will say to itself, am I better off going theatrical and spending, in the case of a wide release, if it's international as well, which most of those wide releases are, I'm going to be putting up an extra $75 to $125 million in marketing costs to launch the film around the world. Am I going to get that $125 million back either out of theatrical or downstream? The downstream aspect of this, lovingly, it's demonstrable, and I hope all of you have read this to a fairly well over the last few months. It's demonstrable that a project that goes theatrical wide becomes more valuable, not less valuable, downstream. Does that overcome the cost element, my so-called $75 to $125 million? Well, that's a It all depends. So we now have to look at what genres of films or what particular films are the studios looking at when they decide to go theatrical as opposed to digital at the outset. And what we also are going to be looking at is how long is the theatrical exclusive? Is it, I'll call it, the first 3 weekends, 17 days? Longer, 31 days, longer, 45 days, or, forgive me, God willing, 110 days or more? Each studio will determine that on its own for each picture involved. I don't think you can generalize, even though there are patterns that are out there that each studio has chosen for its own benefit, with attention paid to its own situation in the digital world, which differs from major to major to major to studio, all different. So it's all over the place. So my fun class at UCLA, I have 2 charts that I show the students on the first day of class. And it's, here's what happens, sequential distribution prior to the pandemic. And I can put that on 2 charts, on 2 pages, and it was pretty simple to do. And today I can't even come close because, as I just said, it all depends on the studio and it all depends on the picture, and there's essentially no rules involved. Having said that, I can take you through the windowing that is mostly done in the world today. And I mean world, not just US. The first downstream window, in most cases, certainly in most cases with the wide release, is what I'm calling PEST or PVOD. The P in both cases stands for premium. The S is for electronic sell-through, or VOD for VOD. That seems to kick in first. Again, when depends on the film and on the studio involved. And you have 3 issues that you ought to know about. One is, what's the price? How much does it cost the consumer to get access either to the PEST or the PVOD? And the way that's playing out right now is mostly a $20 fee, which is uniform in quotes for PVOD, that is the rental part, or $30 for what we'll call the tent pole that is bigger and therefore can charge a higher price. So we have the retail price issues. There's a hidden antitrust issue there because the retailer outlet is supposed to determine the price rather than the studio determining the price. The second is for the studio, do you go in-house or do you go third party or a combination? So for example, Disney seems to want, in doing its, I'll call it pest PVOD, to go only in-house on its features, so it's on both sides. Universal, by contrast, is completely third party. What's similar or almost identical is the deal that's between the outlet and the distributor is an 80-20 split in favor of the distributor. So at a $20 pricing, for example, the studio keeps $16 and pays residuals. There's the fun one. They should be paying on 16. They may just be, some of them may be trying to pay on a 20% vid royalty, but we'll deal with that some other day. Profit participants want that $16 in the pot, and people at Disney working on a Disney picture may want $20 on the pot in order to disregard the fact that it's inside. Anyway, that's one of the fun ones there. Good news in the pest PVOD world is it didn't really exist until 4 years ago. So that's the one that is zero and now a plus. I'm now going to get into the reverse. So following the pest PVOD window is these, I'll call it home entertainment window. The physical DVD or Blu-ray is gone. Yes, you can still do some collector stuff, and they are still, in quotes, publishing or promoting films that are able to be bought physically transactional, whether Blu-ray, DVD, or 4K, and so on. Physical home video used to be 120 to 150% of box office. It now basically doesn't exist for all intents and purposes. And unfortunately, at least the way we're looking at numbers, digital, either pest VVOD, PVOD, or downstream, hasn't made up for that loss. Anyway, sorry, we do have a more arguably robust digital outlet downstream past pest and PVOD on a either a subscription model or, to a much lesser extent, a transactional model. But it isn't as good as it was. Following that, we're looking at what used to be called premium pay, popularized in the US, obviously, by HBO, which is now merged into Max, and that kicks in 6 to 8 months post-theatrical release. The studios who do this and all do it in-house, I'm not talking about Sony because they go to third parties, but the in-house studios, the 4 of them, are not as transparent with their rate cards as they used to be when they were in a B2B world. And so that's causing some problems, both for participants and for guilds. And there's a bunch of lawsuits and arbitrations that have been brought in that regard. Same thing downstream further with ad-supported television, whether that's linear, i.e. ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, networks playing pictures, or digital. And what used to be the kind of guidepost before the pandemic was anywhere from a 10 to 12.5% of box office license fee. So if I did $100 million at the box office, I would be looking to do 10, 12, $15 million for that window of roughly 6 years, 7 years of linear. And the issue is, are the participants and or the guilds and unions getting the benefit of that, or are they going to have to fight with the studios to get back up to where that should be? Looking next at theatrical results 2023, first and most important, at least to me, is how many wide releases are out there. The reason I say that is because I'm quite concerned that if the downward trend in releasing theatrical continues, we're going to lose theaters because they won't have stuff to attract consumers. So in last year, there were 83 wide releases in the US, up from 79 in 2022 and up from 81 in 2021. But pre-pandemic, according to S&P Capital IQ, Standards & Poor's division, the majors released 113 wide releases from 2009 to 2019. And theaters stayed around and were happy with that. But going down into the 80s or 70s, it gets a little shaky here. Just for your fun, I'll give you the rankings from last year. First place was Universal, actually second year in a row. Universal had a little over $5 billion of revenue. This is wholesale. It's to Universal. I'm not talking box office. $5 billion, little over, and roughly based on the S&P calculations, a $1.5 billion profit from its theatrical releases. Warner's was second, a little under $1 billion in profit, mainly due to Barbie. And then followed Sony, Paramount, and believe it or not, Lionsgate. And in quotes, last place is a little company called Disney, which last year had $56 million, approximately $56 million of profit, the least of all the majors. The average domestic box office was a little over $88 million. So as you're looking at your Monday or Wednesday trade paper and looking at the tune for each picture, bear that in mind, that at least last year it was 88, and internationally last year was 119, a total of 207.6 of box. So if you're now backing up to what I was talking about before, when I said there's $75 to $125 million of marketing and related costs to release a picture, the theatrical average is around cover, which does show you that those pictures, in essence, the profits on average from the studio point of view are downstream, not upstream. I keep getting, last mention, and I'll say it again, the theater count is crucial, I think, obviously to the theatrical. If we keep running down into the 70s or below, I'm very concerned, not only in the U.S., but internationally as well. There's going to be shutdowns and or consolidation. But now even take a look at what's happening here in the U.S. on cinemas. The top three theater chains who basically do close to 50% of total box office, those three entities, and the other 600 entities in the theatrical business do the other 50%. The top one, AMC, is still struggling mightily with its debt load. The number two entity is just about coming out of Chapter 11. And the third, Cinemark, is doing reasonably well, mainly because they're in a more, I'll call it, monopolistic position in most of their venues, because unlike the top two, they aren't strong theater presence in the top 10 markets in the United States. They aren't LA, New York, Chicago, blah, blah, blah. So if those three are teetering in one form or another. I'm not trying to scare you, I'm just trying to inform you. Okay. Finally, we get to TV and streaming. The viewing and revenue, I've sent you a article from Ondia. It was respected research company that original productions last year are way down from the year before and pointing further downward. To make matters worse, because of the strike, which essentially paralyzed scripted programming for linear and digital, the only survivors during that period were essentially non-scripted and/or documentary, sports, non-union international, and some news or live action stuff. And the reduction affected not only the studios, but also what I'll call the pure streamers. Amazon, Apple, Netflix. And in a weird way, affected the social media entities, the YouTubes, Instagrams, and TikToks of the world. And they are around the world. Indeed, the rise of social media and social media-related viewing is, on the one hand, a testament to the evolving nature of viewer engagement worldwide. And in fact, one or more research companies maintain that today, as we look at it, 25% of the viewing that we do is on social. Meaning that, in effect, the consumer is not paying additional money to see our product. And that takes me to the linear TV subject. The other handout that I sent you on linear TV advertising, I think the title was, "It is entering a terminal decline." Linear TV has crumbled. It used to be over 50% of video global advertising, or if you just considered premium, meaning professionally made, last year it was 80%. But over the next 5 years, it's totally inevitable, I think, as scary as it may be, that on the whole, the combination of online and social media viewing on the revenue front will not increase consumer spend. And I'm going to come back to that in what I'll call my closing remarks. How did all this happen? Where have we been? What are we looking at? As late as 10 years ago, the media industry had a programming offer in the form of a singular cable bundle. Indeed, for the 6 major studios, the cable bundle was the highest or next to highest profitable division of each of the 6. 40% margins plus, and a lucrative side business, as I mentioned before, that theatrical and physical home video were ascendant. But in 2019, it came to a weird reversal, or starting to reverse. In 19, Fox was sold to Disney, pay TV subscriptions started to go backwards, and that was then followed by, we all know, the pandemic, which basically shut down theatrical viewing and accelerated the shift to streaming. The media industry in the last 4 to 5 years, and this is where I'm starting to get more pessimistic, has basically shifted to lower margin product like streaming. Tech companies are encroaching with their own product, and the box office is declining. So even with, if you will, SVOD or AVOD growth, which does exist, whether that's subscription or transactional. Oh, and here's my footnote. In 2013, 3% of consumer video spending was present then on SVOD, AVOD, and pretty clearly going to reach 40% in 2028. But it's doing so without growth in advertising as a whole, or consumer spending as a whole. Indeed, the projection is that inflation, at least here in the United States and probably elsewhere, inflation will be higher than video growth for the next few years, and will be less video growth than discretionary spending or spending on recreational services outside of video. So we seem to be going in the wrong direction. First, streaming services, all owned or controlled by public companies, I'll say this, rightly paying obeisance to Wall Street, are shifting to some form of advertising element to their businesses. With the exception, for example, of Apple, who doesn't have advertising except as part of its sports offering, soccer, baseball. All of the others are basically giving the consumer, I'll call it, 4 choices. We have a so-called fast channel. That's free, it's usually branded, and it's usually old stuff or news or weather. Then a step up from there is a low-priced hybrid, SVOD with AVOD at a lower price, or third tier, a slightly higher mid-range price on a hybrid basis, or number 4, SVOD with no transaction, which is today, of all things, the highest revenue producer of those 4. But all of us will have a choice of one of those 4 from our 7 or 8 now companies that have aspirations worldwide. But in countries like India, China, Indonesia, etc., where good-looking color TV and all of that is not nearly as big. I don't have my cell phone, but you can see my cell phone here. That's what people in those countries are going to be watching. And as I said before, the major studios and the pure streamers are shifting from scripted to non-scripted, local language, ad-supported tiers, sports and live action programming, or even immersive programming to furnishes. So churning down to lower cost streaming through bundling, partnerships, and M&A. And to cap it off, the consumer spend as a whole isn't in a growth mode. Now, for a fun one, will AI solve this problem? That's something that I want you to remember for 5 years from now. I don't know. So what I'm really saying is, I don't know if we can reverse these trends. I don't know whether we can, in quotes, bring back the ancient, meaning pre-2020, ancient situation where we had consumer spend and entertainment spend on a growth greater than the CPI, both here and around the world. But that's kind of the way I have to leave the speech today. So, happy to answer all your questions.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll take it. Well, can we take a couple of questions?
If they're not difficult.
Easy questions only. Easy questions only.
Easy questions, yes.
Locally.
Ken, if you go back to your first bucket of Wall Street and the expectations of bondholders, shareholders, and then look at the complete wipeout that has been announced over the last month or so. How will the market think about funding newer companies, and what is the prognosis for the legacy firms that have a downward slope?
Next question. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, that if we're caught in this downward slope, there's less and less interest on the part of Wall Street investors to feed the beast. Because obviously they like to feed growth, and if we're at a level that's sloping down, I'm not sure. Added to which, and this is a point I really do want to make, that the hesitance about transparency, and I'm almost compelled to say that Netflix is better than everyone else in that regard in terms of giving transparency. Not that they're as good as I would like them to be, but they're better than anybody else in that world. There isn't a VC or PE firm who's going to invest as they used to in features with no transparency downstream. So the only kinds of deals that get made in the absence of transparency downstream would be if you were betting solely on box office. Anyway, okay.
Other questions, anyone? Going once?
Have I depressed you sufficiently?
Going twice? No more difficult questions. Thank you, everybody.